Story 1. I was stalked by the beast of Bray Road. I grew up in northern Chicago, still live here and have many friends here. About 5 years ago, the best of my childhood friends moved to Madison, Wisconsin for a new job. A few weeks after he left, we had a discussion about me coming to visit him at his new place. Madison is northwest of where I live in Chicago, and a typical trip would take a little over 2 hours traveling west to Rockford, and then on north to Madison. "You know," my friend said, "instead of taking the quickest route from where you are, why don't you drive through Walworth County and try to spot the Beast of Bray Road?" I couldn't help but laugh at the idea. The Beast of Bray Road was a legend, a creature said to lurk in the rural areas of Walworth County, resembling a werewolf or some other half-man, half-wolf monstrosity. As far as I was concerned, it was the stuff of campfire tales and late-night horror movies, not something to be taken seriously. I initially dismissed the idea, planning to take the usual route to Madison. That Friday night, though, as I was leaving from work and traveling home to gather my things for the weekend trip, a sense of adventure came over me. I thought, what the hell, and decided to take my friend's advice, just for the thrill of it. As I drove north towards Walworth County, the sun went down and darkness was now upon me. I reached Walworth County and turned right onto Bray Road, a desolate stretch of asphalt that mostly drives into nothing. Open fields, a few isolated houses, and some eerie cornfields is about all that there is to the road. I switched on my high beams and scanned back and forth as I was driving the little 4-mile stretch of road. As I reached the end of it, I saw exactly what I expected to see. Absolutely nothing. Instead of taking the quickest route back, I decided to give it one more go, and I cut a U-turn. I had backtracked back down the road about a mile when I heard a pop, and my car started to wobble a little bit. Immediately I knew I had a flat tire. I drive an old car and haven't been the best at taking care of it, especially the tires. I got out and walked around, and sure enough, it was a flat. I opened my trunk and retrieved the spare tire, only to discover that it was nearly flat itself. I stood there frustrated, partly because of my situation, and partly because I hadn't prepared for something like this. A car or two passed as I stood there trying to figure out what to do. Suddenly, a pickup truck pulled up beside me. The driver rolled down his window and asked if I was okay. I explained my situation and mentioned my low spare tire. The man said that he lived nearby and offered to retrieve an air pump to help me out. I was grateful and agreed. As he drove off, I climbed back into my car, intent on passing the time by checking my phone. Lost in all of this was my location. I had completely forgotten where I was. I was still on Bray Road. Minutes dragged on as I played on my phone, and then, suddenly, bang! A huge bang brought me to attention, and I looked around. There was nothing. I got out and walked around to the other side of my car to find a huge rock lying next to my car. I looked up and into the cornfields nearby, and that's when I saw it. At first, all I saw was glowing eyes. It was dark, but those eyes were piercing straight through the cornfields. I froze. As the eyes moved forward a little bit, I could make out the silhouette of what looked like a large dog. Then, before I could even process what was happening, it stood up. The eyes rose up above the corn stalks, and I could make out a body on this thing. It stood upright, like a human, but its face resembled that of a dog. It had arms and hands. It didn't have paws. It had hands. Its eyes were red, and it was growling at me. I absolutely freaked out and scrambled back into my car and locked the doors. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, it was like something bumped up against my car. Whatever this creature was, it seemed to be circling the vehicle. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I looked in my rearview mirror, and this thing was on all fours coming around the backside of my car. It looked like it was massive. I began honking the horn, hoping the loud noise would scare it off, but it didn't. I was screaming and not knowing what to do. I was trapped. My car was propped up on a jack and had no wheel on it. I was paralyzed with panic. As it was about to reach my driver's side door, headlights appeared over the hill in the distance. I began honking my horn and flashing my lights frantically, hoping that someone would stop. The truck began to slow, and I could see that it was the man who had stopped earlier, returning with the pump. I looked into my rearview mirror and the dog, or whatever it was, had disappeared. I recounted the horrifying encounter, my voice shaking as I spoke. The man looked at me with a puzzled expression, yet I felt like he knew exactly what I was talking about. "Well, let's get you changed up and out of here," the man said. As I filled my spare with air and changed out tires, the man kept an eye on the cornfields. Fortunately, we didn't hear or see anything else out of the ordinary. When I finally reached Madison and told my friend what had happened, he chuckled and dismissed everything that I had to say, chalking it up to nothing more than an entertaining story. But I knew better. I was there. I saw the beast of Bray Road. I know it's real, and I will never go back to that road ever again. Story 2. A horrifying intruder story. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a warm, golden hue across my room. I stirred, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing against my eyelids. Something wasn't right. My stomach churned and twisted, an unfamiliar ache signaling that today wouldn't be a normal school day. I mustered the strength to sit up, the sheets tangling around my legs as I swung them over the side of the bed. The floor felt cold beneath my feet, and my head was spinning uncontrollably. As I stood, I paused for a moment, swaying unsteadily. The thought of facing a day at school seemed impossible. With a heavy sigh, I trudged downstairs, my steps dragging like lead. In the kitchen, I found my mother preparing breakfast. I mustered the strength to tell her I didn't feel well. She looked concerned but understanding, telling me I could stay home for the day before she left for work. I considered a slice of dry toast, but my queasy stomach protested even the thought of food. As my mother's car backed out of the driveway, I retreated back to my bedroom. I settled back onto my bed, wrapping myself in a cozy blanket. The TV played in the background, its murmur of voices providing a dull comfort. I tried to lose myself in the screen, hoping to forget the discomfort coursing through me. Minutes turned to hours, the day outside drifting into a muted gray. I was cocooned in the quiet of the house, the only sound my own shallow breaths and the faint whisper of the TV. It was then that I heard it, a slight bang that jolted my senses. I couldn't discern its origins, whether it came from inside or outside. My ears strained, desperately trying to capture any other sounds. At first, there was nothing but silence. But just as I began to relax back in, I began to hear faint creaking from below, like footsteps on the wooden floors. My heart quickened, beating a frantic rhythm in my chest. My eyes darted around the room, searching for some logical explanation. Maybe it was just the house settling, but the unease in my gut told me otherwise. I tiptoed to the edge of the staircase, peering down into the emptiness below. The air seemed colder there, carrying an unfamiliar tension. My fingers gripped the banister, knuckles turning white as I summoned the courage to descend. Each step felt like an eternity. The sounds grew clearer, more deliberate, like deliberate footsteps echoing through the silence. Panic surged through me, urging me to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my room. But something held me captive, an inexplicable need to uncover the truth. The lower floor greeted me with an unseen presence. I moved cautiously, my breath hitching at every unfamiliar sound. The living room stood empty, the curtains drawn tight against the outside light. I dared to peek into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my ears. Nothing. The rooms were as still as a photograph, frozen in time. Then, a muffled thud echoed through the house, distant yet unmistakable. It was coming from the direction of my mother's bedroom. Dread gripped me, threatening to pull me under, but my feet moved of their own accord. As I approached my mother's room, my heart began to pound uncontrollably, my breath caught in my throat. What I saw next would give me nightmares for years to come. Standing in my mother's room was a towering figure. His silhouette was tall and broad. The details of his face were obscured, but his eyes were visible, gleaming with an unsettling intensity, and staring directly into mine. Time seemed to stretch and warp around us. The weight of the moment pressed down on me like an oppressive force. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out even the faintest whisper of a sound. We stood there, eyes locked, a battle of wills that seemed to span an eternity. Then, with deliberate purpose, he took a step forward, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. A scream tore from my lips, an instinctual response to the encroaching danger. I raced back upstairs, fear gripping me. The belief that he was coming for me clung to my thoughts like a suffocating shroud. In one fluid motion, I hurtled through the threshold of my bedroom doorway, the momentum carrying me forward. Behind me, the door slammed shut with a resounding bang, sealing off the unknown presence that lurked on the other side of it. Panic surged through me, urging me to find shelter, to hide from the unseen threat that had breached the sanctity of my home. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a place of refuge, a stronghold to weather the storm of terror. Without hesitation, I lunged towards the closet, fingers fumbling to grasp the handle. The door swung open, revealing a narrow, confined space. In my haste, I squeezed myself inside, the scent of familiar clothes and shoes enveloping me. I shut the door and the darkness swallowed me whole, the confines of the closet providing a false sense of safety. I heard a thud, then another. I pressed my back against the closet wall, willing my breaths to steady. The seconds stretched into an agonizing crawl, time slowing as I waited, every nerve on edge. And then, nothing. Only complete silence. I sat, motionless, straining with all my might to catch hold of any sound. But there was only silence. Minutes felt like hours, the silence oppressive, broken only by the steady rhythm of my breaths. The tension was unbearable, a suffocating weight on my chest. And then, just as quickly as the sounds had faded, they returned. Disbelief washed over me. I had thought the intruder had left. I could hear the footsteps approaching, ascending the stairs. As the footsteps drew closer, a terrifying thought pierced straight through my heart. In my haste to make for the closet, I had forgotten to lock the bedroom door. I pressed my trembling hands against the fabric of my clothes, a futile attempt to silence the involuntary tremors that had taken hold of me. Then, the creak of my bedroom door sent fresh waves of terror coursing through me. Tears welled in my eyes, but I bit my lip to stifle any sound. Footsteps drew nearer, each one echoing like a death knell. The sounds of movement and activity reached a fever pitch, filling the air with a chaotic symphony. It was a haunting contrast to the oppressive silence that had reigned just moments before. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like a desperate plea for escape. I could hardly believe it. My tormentor was still present, refusing to yield to the passage of time. I was frozen, a statue of fear, my senses heightened to a painful intensity. The footsteps drew nearer, each one a menacing cadence that seemed to reverberate through the room. I pressed myself further into the closet, willing the darkness to swallow me whole. Then, with agonizing slowness, the doorknob turned, the door inching open. My breath caught in my throat, my eyes squeezed shut in a desperate bid for invisibility. It was the moment of truth. As the door swung open, a shaft of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the cramped confines of my hiding place. It was my mother, her face etched with concern and relief. She had come home early from work, her presence a beacon of salvation in the midst of my terror. She rushed towards me, her arms enveloping me in a tight embrace. I could feel her heart beating against my own, a reassuring rhythm that anchored me to reality. She asked what was wrong, her voice a soothing balm against the chaos that had unfolded. I recounted the harrowing encounter, each word a tremor in the stillness. Her grip on me tightened, a silent promise of protection and reassurance. With unwavering resolve, she reached for her phone, dialing the numbers to report the intrusion. The police were on their way, determined to unravel the mystery of the man in the shadows. An investigation ensued, casting its net wide, but the intruder proved as elusive as smoke in the wind, leaving behind no trace, no clue to unravel the mystery. It was as if he had never truly been there, a phantom slipping through the fingers of those who sought him. With each passing day, the initial shock and fear began to ebb, replaced by a lingering unease. Our home, once a sanctuary, bore the weight of that day's terror in its very foundation. Every creak and whisper seemed to carry an echo of that chilling presence. Yet, amidst the shadows of fear, there emerged a beacon of strength. My mother's love shone brightly, a steadfast pillar of support and protection. Her determination to keep us safe was unwavering, a testament to the fierce resilience of a mother's heart. Story 3. Alone in the office. The dim hum of fluorescent lights overhead was all I could hear. The office was vast, open plan, and at this hour, eerily silent. I stayed late, really late, to catch up on a very important project, believing the stillness would help me concentrate. But as hours slipped away, the expansive floor filled not with peacefulness, but with a sense of unease. From my desk, I could see row after row of empty chairs and vacant cubicles. In the daytime, this place buzzed with activity, voices melding into a noise of workplace banter. But now, the silence was harsh. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed, a message notification. The screen displayed an unknown number. Enjoying the peace? I frowned. Perhaps it was someone from work, although the contact should have been saved. I typed back, "Who is this?" But there was no response. Shaking off a mild sense of anxiety, I decided to head to the break room for a coffee. As I passed through the maze of workstations, the hairs on my neck prickled. I felt observed, even though the office was supposedly empty. The break room's light was faulty, flickering intermittently, a nice spooky touch to an already creepy situation. As the coffee machine gurgled to life, another message appeared on my phone. "It's better in the dark." I felt a chill. I wasn't amused at all. Holding my phone tightly, I responded, "Who are you? This isn't funny." Instead of typing, the messenger sent an audio clip. Hesitantly, I played it. It was a recording of my own voice from earlier in the evening, speaking to a colleague. "I'll be staying late tonight. Don't wait up." Swallowing hard, I realized that whoever this was had been here, had been close enough to record my conversation. Panic gnawed at me. I needed to leave. I darted back to my desk to grab my belongings. On my way, I thought I caught a fleeting glimpse of someone in my periphery, just beyond the glow of the exit sign, but I couldn't tell if someone was really there, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. At my desk, I quickly shut down my computer and stuffed my papers into my bag. I heard a soft ping from my phone. Why the rush? We're only just getting acquainted. With adrenaline coursing through me, I bolted for the stairs, avoiding the elevators, too slow and too unpredictable. As I ran, I dialed the police. The operator's voice was calm as I explained my situation. She advised me to exit the building and wait in a safe place. As I reached the ground floor, I stole a glance behind me. There was nothing, just the quiet expanse of the office, the occasional flickering light, and that oppressive silence. I sprinted across the lobby and out into the chilly night. Gasping for breath, I looked around. The parking lot, dimly lit by the scattered street lamps, was empty. I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the only sign of life in the desolate scene. The police arrived within minutes, their blue and red lights breaking the stillness. They swept the building but found no one. My manager was informed, and after checking the security camera footage, he confirmed that no one had entered or left the building after me. The messages, they said, could have been someone's idea of a cruel joke, perhaps a co-worker, but they took them seriously, especially given the voice recording. Weeks passed. The fear gradually faded, replaced by a low-grade paranoia. Every evening as the office emptied, I'd get that familiar unease, making me leave with the last group of colleagues. It was during one of those evenings, as a coworker and I shared an elevator to the parking lot, that she looked at me and said, "You know, I once stayed late here, just once. I felt watched the entire time." I stared at her, my pulse quickening. "Did anything happen?" She shook her head. "No messages or anything, just that feeling, like I wasn't really alone." The police never identified the number that texted me, saying it was likely a burner phone. As I think back to that night, and I think about the messages and the unknown individual, I find myself trying to determine what is more terrifying: the feeling of being completely alone in that vast office, or the chilling doubt that perhaps I never truly was when I should have been. Story 4. A Night at Crybaby Bridge. You know, every town has its legends, those tales that parents use to scare their kids into behaving, or stories teenagers dare each other to explore. In my small town, just 3 miles northwest of Monmouth, Illinois, we had the Crybaby Bridge. For as long as I can remember, older kids would tell us the gruesome tale of the school bus tragedy at the bridge. It was said that many years ago, during a particularly harsh rainstorm, an elementary school bus, filled with innocent children, met its doom there. A sudden flash flood washed the bridge out, and the bus, unable to stop in time, plunged off the side. Every single child on board was claimed by the raging waters, but that's not the end of the story. Legend says that the spirits of those kids never left. It was rumored that if you positioned your car at the start of the bridge precisely at midnight and placed it into neutral, those same children would muster their ethereal strength to push your vehicle across. And if you were brave, or perhaps foolish, enough to sprinkle baby powder on your bumper, you'd see their tiny handprints as proof of their presence. My friends and I, we never really bought into the legend, maybe because we thought we were too rational, too logical. But on Halloween night in 2006, a part of us wanted to see if there was any truth to it. We decided to take Mark's Jeep, big enough to fit all four of us, and old enough that we wouldn't be devastated if it got a scratch or two. As we approached the bridge, we shared light-hearted banter, laughing off our mild anxieties. The clock ticked closer to midnight. Following the ritual as we had heard it, I sprinkled baby powder all over the Jeep's bumper. We all inspected it, making sure every inch was covered, half expecting to see some marks already. But there was nothing, just the smooth white powder. Mark, in a dramatic fashion, aligned the Jeep at the start of the bridge. He placed the car into neutral and revved the engine, heightening our heart rates. Then we sat and waited. For something. Anything. Minutes felt like hours. Nothing happened. We all started laughing, chastising ourselves for even thinking this could be real. I remember my friend Sarah joking about how she'd have a better chance finding a ghost in her attic. We were on the brink of giving up, labeling this as another failed adventure when it began. It started as a faint, distant sobbing. "Is that a baby?" Mark whispered, but the sound grew, evolving into multiple cries, a mixture of countless voices, each one louder and more distressed than the last. Our chuckles died down instantly. Suddenly the Jeep lurched forward. It was subtle at first, like when you think you've forgotten to put your car in park. But then it quickly gained momentum. The wheels rolled over the old tarmac, and the once distant cries now sounded like they were right inside our car. My heart raced, every cry penetrating my ears, every sob tearing at my soul. In our panic, none of us thought to stop the car. It felt like we were in the clutches of an unseen force, hurtling us with increasing speed towards the other side of the bridge. Our laughter had been replaced with screams, our skepticism with pure, unadulterated terror. The Jeep accelerated quickly, faster and faster, until with one final jolt, it came to a halt, having crashed into the protective barrier on the other side of the bridge. We sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Our breaths were ragged, our hands shaking. As the reality of our situation sank in, we slowly stepped out, inspecting the Jeep for damage. That's when we saw them. On the baby-powdered bumper were dozens of tiny handprints, clear against the white backdrop. Handprints of children who had met their untimely end on that very bridge. The undeniable proof was right there in front of our eyes. We hopped back into the Jeep and drove back into town. It was quiet the entire way back. Honestly, I think we were all just too shaken to say much. Even now, years after the event, we reflect back and try to come to terms with it. The four of us don't talk about that night much. The weight of it hangs on us. I'm sharing this now, not as a dare or challenge, but as a warning. Some legends, no matter how unbelievable they seem, hold a grain of truth. Crybaby Bridge is real. Those children, they're still there, waiting. If you ever find yourself in Monmouth and hear the tale of Crybaby Bridge, remember our story. Respect the legend, and whatever you do, don't venture there at midnight. Story 5. The Scariest Repairman Story. I've worked as a repairman for the last 3 years. Ever since I got out of high school, I've not been that eager to go get a 9-to-5 job or flip burgers or anything like that. I like being on my own time with minimal supervision. Being a repairman works out great for me. I can take odd jobs here and there while I try to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. One day I got a call from a friend who said that he knew someone that had just bought some land and needed somebody to gut an abandoned building on the property. Not exactly a repair job, depending on how you look at it, but after getting all the details I agreed and took the job. The project was to gut an abandoned church so that it could be converted into something else. A storage building? A cabin? I didn't know and didn't really care. My job was to gut it down to its bones, and then from there, it was somebody else's problem. When I pulled in the first day, I immediately got the creeps. The church sat at the end of a long dirt driveway, off a road less traveled, and in the middle of nowhere. Looking at the building, it wasn't very large, but I was a one-man crew, so I figured it would take at least 3 days to get gutted out. The moment I stepped inside, the place felt off. It still had that typical abandoned building feel, though. Graffiti on the wall, broken glass, and cigarette butts on the floor, the usual. After giving the place a brief look around, I started unloading tools and got to work. Nothing unusual the first morning. I worked until noon and then drove into town to get a bite to eat for lunch. When I came back, however, there were the first signs that something was going on. Some of my tools had been moved. At first, I just chalked it up to absent-mindedness. Maybe I moved them myself and just wasn't paying attention. But then I noticed that some of them were laying in the front yard. I definitely didn't do that. Someone for sure had to have been there. Thinking about the graffiti and cigarette butts, I told myself it was probably a couple of stupid kids and went about my business, though I was a little bit more on alert. The rest of the day went by without any issues, and I turned in before it started getting dark. I packed up my expensive tools but left some of the larger things: a ladder, a chair, and a fold-out table, just to name a few. When I returned the next day, it again felt like someone had been there. The ladder that I had left leaning up against the wall was now in the floor, and my chair was tipped over. I was part annoyed, and part spooked as well. This place was out in the middle of nowhere, and it had such a creepy vibe. The building itself, the land, its location, it all made my skin crawl, just to be honest. I didn't feel that there was much that I could do about it, so I just straightened everything up and got back to work. This day was a little bit different, though. I started hearing strange noises. At first they were coming from the nearby woods, then it sounded like they were coming from right outside the church. I'd look around and there was nothing. I repeatedly told myself not to worry about it. Maybe it was just a deer or something. I think deep down inside, though, I knew something was way off about this place. Again, I finished up before dark and headed out. The next day, I brought out a generator. I wanted to be done with this place, and I anticipated that I might be working a little bit later in order to finish up and not have to come back again the next day. I worked as quickly as I could the entire day. I kept one eye on what I was working on and another on my surroundings. As it got later into the evening and the sun started going down, I took a moment to weigh my options. I could either hook my lights up to the generator, work late into the night, and get everything done, or come back the next morning to finish up. I wanted out of this place, so I figured I'd just hook the lights up and get it done. It would be a decision that I would later regret. It was dark now, and I only had a few more hours of work left. I was grinding away when, out of nowhere, the generator cut out and the lights along with it. It was almost pitch black. It happened so quickly that my eyes didn't have time to adjust to the darkness, if that makes sense. My first thought was that the generator had run out of gas. But then I thought to myself, that's impossible. I just filled it up, and there's no way it could have used all of the gas up already. I was somewhat puzzled. As I was trying to make my way over to the generator, it happened. I heard a young woman's voice. It was slithery, it was terrifying, and it said one word: "Leave." I spun around. I'm the type of person that reacts aggressively when I'm frightened. My words get loud and deep. I stand erect and puff out my chest and try to intimidate back whatever is frightening me. But deep down inside, I'm shaking to my core. "Who the freak is freaking with me?" I yelled out, except I didn't use the word freak, if you know what I mean. For a second, there was nothing. It was dead quiet. What happened next, though, would have me questioning what reality is for the rest of my life. In my peripheral, I saw some movement, barely illuminated by what little bit of moonlight there was. I turned my head to look over. In the corner of the house was a figure, best as I could describe. It looked to be a young woman. Her hair was parted straight down the middle. Her clothes were tattered and looked to be from the late 1800s or early 1900s. She looked menacing and didn't look like she was happy at all. But what really got me were the eyes. You see, there were none. They were dark and hollow, and there was absolutely nothing where the eyes should have been. Before I could even process my own thoughts, my legs were ushering me out the front door. I was screaming hysterically. Not something I want to admit, but if I'm going to tell my story the way that it happened, then that's what happened. I jumped into my old pickup truck and started scrambling for my keys. I couldn't find them. I started to hyperventilate as I was looking for them. Then I realized something. I had left them, along with my phone, on the fold-up table inside the church. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had two choices. Either make a mad dash back in there to retrieve them, or make a mad dash down the dirt driveway on foot. Whichever option I chose would require that it be done in near pitch-black darkness. I opted for the keys and the phone. I felt like it gave me a better chance to get out of there more quickly. The other option left me running down a long, dark road in the middle of nowhere. I threw the driver's side door open, ran back in as quickly as I could, and dove for my keys and phone. Luckily, my eyes had somewhat adjusted to the darkness now, and I could make out where the table was. Pivoting to head back towards my truck, I took a glance at the corner that this woman, or whatever you want to call it, was. There was nothing. She, or it, or whatever it was gone. Part of me was relieved, and the other part was gripped with fear. If she wasn't there in the corner, where was she? I didn't want to waste any more time trying to figure it out. I burst back out the front door and back into my truck. I hit the ignition and it fired up with no issues. I threw it in reverse and mashed the gas pedal to the floorboard. I cut a 180, and when my truck came to a stop, she was there, in my headlights, about 15 feet away, directly in front of me. This time, every ounce of detail was visible. Just as I had seen before, she had long dark hair. She was wearing a tattered dress, and her eyes were completely hollow. There was one other detail this time, though. Where there should have been feet, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. She was floating about 6 inches off the ground. Where there should have been feet coming out of the bottom of her dress, there was nothing. I screamed out, "What the—" and the F word. I raised my left hand up over my eyes with my palm turned outwards, kind of the way that someone would raise up their hand to look in the direction of a really bright light, or the sun or something. It was instinctual. I didn't even really think about it. I guess part of me didn't want to see what was about to happen next. I wanted out of there. She was between me and my exit, and I wasn't going to take any more time making any more decisions. I slammed on the gas and headed straight for her. With my hand up blocking my view, I squinted a little bit, anticipating some type of impact or thud or something. But as I accelerated forward, there was nothing. No thud, no bump, no scream, nothing. All I could hear was the sound of gravel and dirt being launched from my back tires. As I darted forward for what felt like probably 60 or 70 feet, I finally put my hand down, and all I could see out in front of me was the dirt driveway. I glanced into my rearview mirror and saw nothing. I flew down the driveway, out onto the road, and drove straight home in record time. The rest of the night was a daze. When my adrenaline dump finally wore down, I was completely exhausted, but at the same time, I was too terrified to sleep. At some point, though, I guess the exhaustion got the better of me because I finally passed out. The next morning, I called in to the property owner. I told him that I couldn't make it back because I was sick. At the time, I didn't feel like it was a lie. The events of the prior night had left me completely out of it, and there was no force on earth that could get me to go back to that property. We had a brief discussion, and I detailed to him what little work was left to do. After a little bit of back and forth, we came to an agreement that the job was done. I made no mention of the woman or the events of that night. I didn't want to sound crazy, and I wasn't going back, so as far as I was concerned, that building was now somebody else's problem. Later that day, I called my friend and told him the same thing. I was sick. I asked if he could retrieve my gear. I had left behind the generator, lights, and all kinds of tools. I did feel bad about that request. sending my friend out there to risk running into whatever that thing was. But again, at the time I was out of my mind, and there was no way I was stepping foot back on that property. Luckily, my friend was able to retrieve my gear without incident. I will never ever forget what I saw that night. Up until this point, I've refrained from using the word ghost. I've never believed in that kind of stuff, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what else I would call it. I will tell you one thing though. Flipping burgers suddenly doesn't sound like that bad of a gig. Story 6. The Mysterious Tent. The following is a story that happened to me and my friends about 4 years ago. My friends Alex and Chris and I headed to a remote part of the Sierra Nevada to go camping and fishing. We had been in this spot before and very much enjoyed it, so we decided to go back and make a weekend of it. Well, I wouldn't be telling this story if something incredibly creepy didn't happen. We had trekked deep into the forest to our spot. We loved it because we would be far from anybody else. Just the three of us, and the serene beauty of nature, that type of thing, you know? On the second day, we set out to go fishing. All was well. We traveled up the river some and had a blast. A few hours before sunset, we decided that we should get back so that we could get a fire going before dark. When we got back to the campsite, we noticed that there was another tent oddly close to ours. Uncomfortably close, maybe 75 to 80 feet away. It was a plain old tent, with no other camping equipment in sight. Our first impressions were ones of annoyance. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and of all the places that someone could throw up a tent, they do it here, right next to ours. Out of courtesy, though, we approached the tent, calling out a greeting. No response. We called again, and again, nothing. It appeared that no one was there. Finally, Chris came across and said that he was going to take a look inside. "Best not," I said. But before I could even finish, he was making his way over. He walked over, slowly and cautiously. When he reached the door, he slowly unzipped it. "What do you see?" Alex asked. "Nothing," Chris replied. "What do you mean?" I said. "I mean, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing inside." We were all confused, but assumed the occupant was out exploring or something, so we went about our day, trying to shrug off the unease. It got darker and darker and darker. As we went about our business, we kept making glances over at the tent, expecting someone to show up at some point. We had gotten lost in our own affairs when out of nowhere, a light flicked on from the inside of the tent. Inside was the silhouette of a single person that we could see. We all looked at each other. Nobody ever saw anybody walk over and into the tent. At this point, the creepiness was off the charts. We didn't expect for things to get any creepier, but they did. "Go say something," Chris said to me. "What do you want me to say?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "Anything." I hesitated but finally gave in. I walked over slowly, watching the silhouette the entire time. It was motionless, just sitting there in the middle of the tent doing nothing. I got closer and closer. My heart was pounding out of my chest. When I got within about 15 feet, just as I was about to speak up, I could see the head of this person, or whatever it was, begin to turn slowly, like it was looking over in my direction. I looked back at the guys, and they were motioning for me to continue. I turned back towards the tent, and just as I was about to speak out, a blood-curdling scream came from within the tent. Before I could even realize it, I had turned and was running back towards the guys. We were all in a panic at this point. What just happened? Who was this person? What in the hell is going on? We argued amongst ourselves, frantically trying to decide what to do. As we did, I reached into my pocket to grab my phone. 0 reception. Not even a single bar. It was the dead of night now. We were out in the middle of nowhere, had no cell phone reception, and there was a mysterious tent 75 feet away from us with an unknown occupant that had let out a scream like none of us had ever heard before. We were absolutely terrified. As we argued about what to do, there was motion from within the tent. The silhouette appeared to be looking in our direction still, though it was difficult to tell. It said nothing. Then, after a few seconds, it looked like this person was raising their arm up to the top of the tent. We were all wide-eyed, locked into the motion coming from within the tent. And then, out of nowhere, the light inside the tent went out. "What in the hell? What in the hell?" we were all saying to each other. Questions were flying, but we had no answers. None of us knew what to do. We had gear and supplies and tents everywhere, and we were miles from our vehicle. We went back and forth trying to figure out what to do. Finally, we decided that we would go ahead and stay the night, and wait until daylight to try to make sense out of everything. From there, we would just leave altogether if the unknown person had not yet made contact with us. However, we would take shifts with one of us staying awake to watch over the creepy visitor. "Keep the fire going," I said. The other two agreed. Alex was first up. At around 1 a.m., Alex woke up Chris. As they told me, they switched shifts with no new events taking place. As far as they knew, the weird person was still in the tent. Surprisingly, I managed to get some sleep. It wasn't enough, though. Chris woke me up at 4 a.m., and I was to take over until daylight. As Alex crawled into his tent, I threw more wood on the fire. I remember sitting there, wide awake at first. The fire was nice. It provided some comfort in contrast to our unknown visitor. I remember watching the tent for any movement. Nothing. I would watch the fire for a little while, and then look over at the tent. I did this over and over and over. I remember getting more and more tired. After about an hour or so, I was struggling to stay awake. I would doze off, just to catch myself, and then doze off again. Finally, fatigue won over, and I fell asleep. The next thing I remember is that it was daylight and Chris was shaking me. "Wake up, what the hell?" he said. "Where did the person go?" I looked over to the mysterious tent. There was nothing. It was gone. "You fell asleep?" Chris said in somewhat of an annoyed voice. At this point, Alex was making his way out of his tent. "Where'd they go?" he said. "I don't know," I replied. We searched for any sign of the person. There was nothing, not even footprints. It was like they were never there in the first place. At this point, we had enough. It was daylight now, so we began to pack our things. We weren't going to wait around to see if the person returned. We were exhausted when we arrived back home. It was a trip that we will never forget. To this day, we have no idea who the person was, or what their intentions were. Was it some sick prank? Was someone trying to scare us off of the spot for good? Unfortunately, we may never know. We never went back to that spot again. It's a shame. It was one of our favorites. Story 7. Unearthed Secrets, a Haunting Cold Case. It's not every day that a medical examiner is called to revisit a long-forgotten cold case. The details of this particular case had faded into obscurity, buried in the dusty archives of a small-town police department. But then, out of nowhere, a detective called me, requesting my expertise. He believed there was more to this unsolved mystery than what met the eye, and I was about to discover just how chillingly accurate his suspicions were. The cemetery, bathed in the eerie glow of a waning moon, seemed like an unusual place to start investigating a crime. But there I was, shivering as the cool night air settled around me. The detective, a tall, shadowy figure in a trench coat, stood beside me, his breath visible in the cold. "Dr. Anderson," he began, "I hope you're ready to delve into a mystery that's been haunting this town for years." I nodded, pulling my lab coat tighter around me. "I'm all ears, Detective?" "Call me Detective Granger," he replied. Detective Granger then led me to a particular grave, worn and forgotten, just like the case itself. We watched as the gravediggers worked by the dim light of their lanterns, carefully uncovering the wooden casket that held the victim's remains. It was the coffin of Amelia Thornton, a woman whose death had puzzled the town for decades. As I observed the exhumation, a feeling of dread crept over me. I had handled numerous autopsies, but something about this case felt different, more ominous. Detective Granger had a theory that Amelia had been poisoned, and new evidence had given him the urge to unearth the truth. The coffin was eventually lifted from its resting place, revealing the rotting wood. With a sense of unease, I approached it, and with gloved hands, began the painstaking process of opening it. The creaking of the coffin lid seemed deafening in the quiet cemetery, and I could feel the eyes of the detective burning into my back. Inside the coffin lay the body of Amelia Thornton. She was dressed in a tattered gown, her pale skin oddly preserved, given the years that had passed. Her features, though weathered, were eerily lifelike. I could almost imagine her breathing, the cold air causing her chest to rise and fall. Carefully, I examined her remains, collecting samples for toxicology testing. Detective Granger watched my every move, his face etched with anticipation. As I worked, I couldn't help but feel as though Amelia's lifeless eyes were following me, accusing me of disturbing her eternal slumber. Hours turned into an eternity as I meticulously dissected the body, looking for any trace of poison. The detective's patience wore thin, and he finally spoke. "Dr. Anderson, there's something you need to see." His voice trembled as he pointed to the inside of the coffin. I turned my gaze toward the dark interior of the casket. My heart skipped a beat as I saw it. Deep, parallel gouges, like the desperate clawing of fingernails, etched into the wood. They were unmistakable, evidence of a horrifying truth. Amelia Thornton had been buried alive, left to struggle and suffer beneath the earth's suffocating embrace. She had clawed and scratched, desperately trying to escape her premature grave. The detective and I exchanged horrified glances, realizing that this cold case had just taken an unthinkable turn. As we closed the coffin and left the cemetery, the chilling memory of those fingernail marks stayed with me, a reminder that some mysteries were better left buried. Detective Granger and I had unearthed a secret that would haunt us for the rest of our lives, a truth that went far beyond the realm of the natural. The events of that night changed me, and I couldn't help but wonder if Amelia Thornton's restless spirit was still seeking justice, or if something far more sinister lurked in the shadows of that forgotten cemetery, waiting to reveal itself once more. Story 8. A terrifying police officer story. I was a police officer for over 20 years. I've responded to countless calls, and after a while they start to blend into one another. Having moved on now, I'm often asked, "What's the one story or call that you can remember from your time on the force?" Hands down, it was the call about the cat, one that you'll never believe, one that I've told to very few people because I always figure that no one will believe me. It was the dead of winter, an overcast day, gloomy. Right after lunch, my new partner and I got a call about a guy, just out on the outskirts of town, going hysterical over some cat. My partner was a newbie, a rookie, and this was just his second day. Great, I thought to myself, an easy one to get the rookie's feet wet. The call came in from a woman stating that her neighbor was, quote-unquote, losing his mind over a cat. The guy was screaming, acting erratic, going in and out of the house. When we pulled up to the house, the front door was wide open, and we could see movement in the darkness of the interior. As we exited our vehicle, we could hear the man screaming from inside. As we began making our way over, the man burst out of the front door and into the yard. He was wearing nothing but his underwear. His eyes were wild, and he was waving his arms around and shouting about a cat. His skin was sickly, like he hadn't seen a shower or sunlight in days. His screams were mostly incoherent, but we managed to pick out a few phrases. "That cat! I want it gone, and I want it out." My partner and I exchanged looks as we tried to calm the man down. Usually we could predict how situations like this might pan out, most likely a drug-induced episode or a severe mental breakdown. But something about this was different. The raw fear in the man's voice was real. Having succeeded in tampering the man down, his screams were now just weird murmurs and mumbles. His movements were still erratic, but non-violent. It appeared that we had done well to de-escalate the situation some. "Should we get this guy an ambulance?" my partner asked. "Probably wouldn't hurt," I said. Leaning towards the man, I gently grabbed his arm with my hand. "Hey man, we got some people coming. We're gonna get you checked out, okay? Let's get you in the car where it's warm until they can get here and take a look at you," I remember saying. My partner ushered the man into the back of the car, and I popped the trunk to grab a blanket. As I was making my way back over, I saw the neighbor at a distance. Handing the blanket over to my partner, I told him to go ahead and call the ambulance in while I spoke with the neighbor. He nodded and grabbed the blanket. I didn't get much out of the neighbor. I spoke with her for a few minutes, and she said that she felt like the guy was deteriorating over the last few months. Every time she would see him, he looked like he was getting worse and worse. "Anybody else over there?" I asked her. "Nope, I've only seen the guy." "What about a cat?" I asked. "I haven't seen a cat," she said as the ambulance rolled up. I thanked the neighbor and walked back over to my partner. Having transferred responsibility of the man over to the paramedics, my partner looked at me and motioned to the house. "Should we see if we can find this damn cat?" he asked. "Wouldn't hurt to check the place out," I said. As the paramedics worked on the guy, we made our way to the front door. We should have turned back right then. Stepping inside, the house felt completely off. It was dark, beat up and run down. The place was filthy, mold crawling up the walls, garbage thrown across the floor, and it just had a smell of decay. Stepping inside was like stepping into a portal. It was depressing, and it was cold in there too. The first thing that I noticed that was out of place was the flies. Lots of them. This didn't make any sense because it was the dead of winter, and again it was freezing in there. How could there be flies, this many of them, and in the middle of winter? We made our way around the trash in the living room and into the kitchen. Nothing. No cat. Making our way over to the entrance to the hallway, there appeared to be 3 bedroom doors and a door to a bathroom. "You check out these 2 rooms, and I'll get the bathroom and the bedroom at the end of the hall," I said to my partner. "Got it," he said. I made my way down slowly, retrieving my flashlight to assist me. It was so dark and disgusting. We had our guard up too. The neighbor said there was no one else, but you can't ever be sure unless you check for yourself. The bathroom produced nothing but a tub, sink, and toilet that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in 10 years. "I got nothing in here," my partner said. "There's not even a bed, just trash and clutter," he said. I responded, "All right, we'll check that other room, and I'll check this last one, and we can get the hell out of here." As I made my way over to the room at the end of the hall, I remember thinking about how eerie and quiet the place was. All I could hear was my partner's footsteps, along with my own, and the sound of flies as they buzzed around my head. The last bedroom was as bad as I thought it was going to be. The lights didn't work. There was a disgusting stained mattress, more trash everywhere, and blankets covering the windows. As I walked into the room, I picked up the sound of something scuffling around on the other side of the bed, on the floor. "That damn cat," I thought to myself. I began to slowly walk around to investigate with my flashlight scanning the floor. Just as I was making my way around the foot of the bed, something darted over from the other side of the bed and into the opened closet. It was small, black, and skimmed across the floor like it was floating. The speed of this thing threw me, but I got a look at it and saw where it went. "Think I got it," I said to my partner. I could hear him walking down the hall now. As he did, I slowly creeped around to get a look at this thing. My flashlight inched across the floor and finally made its way into the closet. It revealed, to my surprise, absolutely nothing. Other than a single shoe and a food wrapper on the floor, there was absolutely nothing. No clothes, no cat, nothing. "What you got?" my partner, now standing beside me, asked. "Wait," I said. "I saw it run in here. It ran into this closet." I was so confused. I know I saw it run in there, but it wasn't there. "You sure?" my partner asked. "Yeah, man, I saw it. It ran in here." Both of us just stared at the empty closet, confused. My partner said. "Should we—" Before he could finish, I cut him off. "Yeah, I guess it's nothing. Let's get the hell out of here." I scanned the closet again one last time, up and down, side to side. I was sure that I had seen it run in there. I couldn't get over the fact that there was nothing. Both of us turned and walked to the bedroom doorway. He was in front of me, and as we rounded the corner, it darted across the other end of the hall, like it was going from the living room to the kitchen. "Did you see it?" my partner asked. "Yeah," I said, having caught just a glimpse of it as I was turning into the hallway. "It's in the kitchen," he said. We hurried down the hall and rounded the corner into the kitchen, and that's when we saw it. It was sitting on the floor, staring directly at us. It was thin and emaciated. You could see the thin skin crawling over its rib bones as it breathed. It was jet black and had no hair. It also looked like it didn't have a tail. It had long, skinny legs and just sat there locked onto us. Its eyes fogged over like it was blind, but we knew it could see us, and it was looking straight through us. My partner and I just froze. We didn't say anything. I think the sight of it just threw us off. We were thinking that we'd see a cat, with fur, meowing and purring. But this thing was none of those things. I'm not sure that it could even be considered a cat, but I guess that's the closest thing that it could be called. What it did next, though, shocked both of us and sent us scrambling. It was sitting on the floor, maybe about 2 to 2.5 feet in front of a thin strip of flat wall between the cabinets in the kitchen. It turned around, walked towards the wall, and then straight up the wall. Now, when I say it walked straight up the wall, I mean it walked. It didn't jump, and then claw at the wall and pull itself up and push with its hind legs. When it reached the wall, it stood up on its 2 hind legs, placed its front legs on the wall, and then just walked up the wall like it was part of the floor. When it got to the top, it turned, and then walked up on top of the cabinets to its right. It was like gravity didn't exist for this thing. Flies were everywhere now. There had to have been 50 of them. They were all over everything. Us, the counters, the cabinets, and the walls. Everywhere. This thing walked up onto the top of the cabinets and started walking back towards us in our direction. It took about 3 or 4 steps, and then it paused, just for a split second, and looked at us. Then it turned its head to the left and walked straight into the wall beside it. It disappeared. Gone. Into the wall. Not a hole in the wall. Straight into the wall beside it. It happened so quickly, neither of us had time to process it. We went from curiosity to panic in a split second. I jolted back and my partner flew back and stumbled over the couch. He started screaming, just like the man we pulled up on. What the F, and holy, well, you know, is about all I could say. Both of us flew out the front door. We moved so fast that we were knocking things over left and right. What the F was that? What the F was that? My partner was asking in a panic. I don't know, man, I replied back. Both of us stumbled back to the car, not taking our eyes off of the front door of that house. Did you see that? My partner asked. Yeah, I effing saw it, I said back. Other than the panicked breathing coming from the both of us, most of the drive back to the station was silent, like we were both just trying to process what we just saw. When we got to the station, we didn't say anything to anybody. We drew lots of looks and had 2 or 3 people ask if we were good, but neither of us said anything because we didn't want to look nuts. It's not a good look for police officers to be talking about disappearing cats. Honestly, the rest of the day was a blur. The next day, I got in a little early. I didn't get a lot of sleep that night, and I was awake anyways, so I just decided that I'd get in and get back to work, and maybe normalcy would settle back in. I was there for a little bit when I got a call from my partner. Hey man, I'm not coming back in, he said. I don't think this work is for me. Listen, I said, this isn't the type of thing that we typically... And before I could even finish, he cut me off. I know, he said, but I'm done. I'm going to look for something else to do. And just like that, he was done. Didn't even make it to day 3. I stayed on the force for another 6 years before calling it quits myself. Never had another experience like it, thankfully. I got word that the man from the house was there another 2 weeks or so, and then split. Moved out of state or something. The house, it's still there. Boarded up and abandoned. That cat or whatever it is it still there? I got no idea. I'll tell you one thing though. I'm not ever going back there to find out. Story 9. The Light in Mrs. Jackson's Room. This is one of the craziest stories you'll ever hear. It happened to me about 11 years ago. It was around 1:30 a.m. and I was making my way down the hall of a nursing home. I was a maintenance man and was doing some work in the kitchen. I needed to get it done overnight so that the kitchen would be available for regular operation during the day. Anyways, I was walking down a hall back to the kitchen after retrieving some tools from my truck. As I passed one of the rooms, its light suddenly flicked on. I paused, stepped back a bit, and peered inside. When I looked inside, a couple of things felt off. An old woman was sitting quietly in a chair, staring at the wall. It was peculiar because the room was nearly empty. It only really had the chair that she was sitting in, a bed, and not much else. The second thing that felt weird is that as old and fragile as the woman looked, it was odd to me that she was able to flick on the light and get in the chair so quickly. I noticed too that her bed was completely made, not a wrinkle on it. Rather than knocking on the door or saying anything to the old woman, I felt like it wasn't my place. I was a maintenance man there to do a job and not be concerned with the affairs of the residents. Instead, I continued walking down the hall and notified a staff member. The staff member and I looked back down the hall together, only to see that the room was dark again. At this point, confusion was really starting to set in. "The fifth door on the right," I said to the staff member. "Mrs. Jackson's room?" she asked. I looked at her and said that I had no idea because I had no idea who Mrs. Jackson was. We walked down to the room together and the staff member flicked on the lights. There was nobody there. The room was completely empty. "Are you sure it was this room?" the staff member asked. "Yes," I said. "There was an old woman sitting in that chair and she was just staring at that wall and the lights were on." Finally, the staff member looked at me and said, "This is Mrs. Jackson's room. She died 2 days ago." I literally felt my blood run cold. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes," she said. We both just stood there and looked at each other. It was like both of us were trying to process what each of us was saying to each other. Finally, I didn't know what else to do or say, so I just said that I was going to finish up in the kitchen, and we both went our separate ways. I finished up and got out of there before the kitchen crew made their way in the next morning. About 4 months later, I ran into that staff member at a Walmart. "You know," she said, "after you went back to the kitchen, I checked the security cameras." My eyes got really wide. "You were right. You walked past that door and the lights came on. After you walked away, they went back off." I was in shock. I knew I wasn't seeing things. "It didn't show anything in the room, but from the view of the hallway, it definitely shows that the lights came on and then went off," she said. "I think we were both already freaked out, so I didn't say anything to you about it that night. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but I know what I saw. There was an old woman in that chair, and according to the staff member, that old woman was no longer alive.